Our third speaker in this session is James Campbell, who's the newly appointed Chief Executive Officer of Sanger Australia Limited. James's career spans 15 years in accounting with KPMG and banking with ANZ, with a consistent focus on agriculture. He has maintained a mobile approach to his career, resulting in roles in institutional banking in China, Victoria, Queensland and the Northern Territory, as well as New South Wales, so well travelled. Recently been appointed CEO of the major beef exporter Sanger Australia, a role which sees him return to Australia after 4 years based in Shanghai as Head of Agribusiness China at the ANZ Bank. He's got several degrees in accounting, and commerce and business administration, and during his time in China, James also served 2 terms as a Director of the Australia Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai. So to give us a bit of a hands-on feel for developments in China and where that's taking us, please welcome James Campbell.
Afternoon all. Thank you for having me to speak. It's a delight to be up here talking about China, which is something that I must say is very dear to me, having had 4 years up there, but also contributing to the agricultural industry through Insight, and now looking after what I think is a terrific business in Sanger, which is the front end or the tip of the spear for the Binderee beef group. What I'd like to touch on today are a few things. I'll talk a little bit about the growth observations. I'm not an economist, I never was one, but I used to hang out with many of them. I'll then talk about Australian agriculture in China today, perhaps more from a trade perspective. Then look at the state of play with respect to red meat, which is now my new home game. What about tomorrow? I think tomorrow is characterised by what we'd term mega trends, and then we'll look at some of the disciplines to adopt in order to adapt to some of these alterations in our macro environment. And then there's no better case study than the one I'm working on at the moment, which is Binderee. And what we're up to with respect to China. Okay, China's at a point where it's transitioning to what you would term a new normal. This is written about in several aspects, but really what it is the world's second largest economy is shifting to a sustainable, consumptive-led development away from its investment-led manufacturing approach. It's all about quality growth. Even in the time I was there, and certainly since the time I've come back, the growth quality is changing. When we look at the trend with respect to a country like China, I always looked at social satisfaction, and anything that becomes too complex in China, regardless of what that is, it all boils back up to social stability. That's what fires on the central government. That's where decisions are made about. So if we strip all that back and look at GDP, employment generation, of which private-owned entities are now generating around about 60% of total new employment in China, to Professor Han's presentation, and fixed asset investment. China's investing very heavily. Take something like the One Belt, One Road initiative, which is really a response to the US pivot to Asia, and that's China connecting with its ancient trading partners along the Silk Road. They're encouraging offshore investment to support those sorts of initiatives. China's not without its challenges. Yes, they are quite widely written about and publicised, but boil it down. Take the equity market challenge that again was referred to. That was a very successful wealth distribution, but really a very, very small percentage of China participated in that stock market boom. If you take the boom itself, around about renminbi $2 trillion was used to settle securities margin calls. There's about 52 trillion of savings in China as it stands today. So multi-year equity booms would not be welcome in China. To me, it's about bank health, because there's many more businesses, individuals that are attached to the health of the banking system in China. Listed companies, local governments tend to be more highly leveraged at around about a 37% leverage. However, households and central government debt is around about 15% or so. So the vast majority of the economy is relatively under-leveraged. However, naturally, and again to Professor Hunt's point, some of those SOEs, etc., and large public companies are finding a narrower debt capacity. Okay, it's a bit small there, I apologise for that. Basically what this is saying is that is Australia exported will export this year $9.3 billion worth of product to China, which represents 6% of China's total agri-food imports, so 6%, which is less than 5% of China's consumptive demand. Australia is actually punching along well on an export basis. Our exports are up 27% on our agri-food versus total China imports of about 12% up. So 27, 12, we're going quite well. Of our top 6 exports, wool, meat and offal, cotton, hides, cereal and oilseeds, they represent 80% of agri-food exports in Australia, and they still have a heavy commodity weighting. Grains, not so much cotton this year because of the stockpile, oilseeds and wool textile. The China-Australia Free Trade Agreement is a ticket to the dance. Now it's up to business. I was lucky enough to join Minister Rob and Minister Joyce and various other delegations while I was up there on the CHUFTA negotiations and roundtables, and a hell of a lot of work went into it. But it couldn't come sooner, particularly around our current competitors such as Brazil, particularly in the meat industry, really increasing some pressure on what we're up to. So they are having a large impact. Because of the US quota when it comes to meat, we're actually without a sustainable alternative at the moment. So there's probably a similar amount of volume going into China at the moment on meat, but in terms of real prices, we're actually down a fair bit because we don't have that US export market to turn to right now. Another small graph. On a China global import basis, that big blue line is oilseeds. China runs on edible oil, but the point here is that these are massive, massive numbers with respect to China's total agri-food imports. So we're talking about $150 billion per year versus Australia of about 9. So the topic of this discussion being how has the Chinese growth affected Australian agriculture? It's not about China growth impacting Australian agriculture. It's how we adapt to a changing environment that's affecting Australian agriculture. Okay, really good stuff. So, if we look at this slide, the bottom line is that China's eating a lot less on a per head basis of red meat than anywhere else in the world, and they're eating a lot more. Australia will never feed all of China. In fact, Australia won't feed the 3.3 billion Asians that are going to double their protein consumption by 2020. We just won't, and we can't. But what we can do is we can understand what's happening in this market and adapt to meet it, and to meet that corner of the delicatessen, so to speak. So if we take this slide and say by 2020, China will demand 100 million tonnes of meat, of which pork is the staple product or commodity. And let's say that their per head consumption hits 11 kilos, which is the national average. The global average. Well, they're going to have to find another 4.5 million tonnes of red meat. Today they're eating 1.5 times the global average of sheep or mutton, and they're eating about 51% of the world average of beef. When we were at the Australian Meat Industry Council conference at the Gold Coast, David McKenna was charged with looking at the Australian beef industry, and he came up with a set of mega trends which are intuitively known, but I hadn't seen them presented in such a way, and so I've borrowed his slide here. I just want to talk about a couple of these as I think they relate to the country we're talking about in China. But take the second one, provenance branding. We talk about region of origin these days, not just country of origin. So do the Chinese. We talk about social licensing, animal welfare. We talk about the impact of social media creating vulnerability. So do the Chinese. We're seeing a shift from domestic to global volume. So this year, Australia will export nearly 75% of its total beef production. It's not all going to China, but it's all being that volume is being exported. The control, significant influence on supply chains. So driving those partnerships, again to Professor Hans's point, we couldn't agree more, as we'll show you shortly, with respect to creating a supply chain return as opposed to a single asset return. The power of technology is very real. Having been an avid WeChat user myself, I was one of 600 million WeChat users. 47% of online retailing in China happens with this. So it's not a keyboard and a screen, it's this. So how can you get onto people's WeChat, and how can you get onto their phone, or really being present without being physically present? So when I put up this sort of slide, I like to think that our business is doing this, and I think we are doing this, but we can do it a lot better. We're moving to compete on values and differentiation. We're being local in our key markets, US, Middle East, of course, China. We're looking to develop our long-term partnerships and get away from a trade relationship. We will still trade, absolutely. Unfortunately, when you kill an animal, you don't get just a bucket of strip loins. You get an entire product to sell, some of which is commodity-based, some of which is primal. But we're trying to value add everything. We're driving value, we're adding focus. With regard to embracing technology, I'll shortly talk about the JD.com transaction that we're working on with our fresh chilled beef. And it's all about continuous improvement. But the ninth one's the big one, because if your house isn't in order, don't start. Particularly, don't start with China. What people do you need? What capital do you need? How much time are you prepared to spend at looking at this sort of thing? And then if it really takes off, have you got the volume to scale? The fourth one sounds like a great problem, but when I was there, I actually saw this happen where the demand suddenly took a hold on something and it just fizzled out, because that demand piece has to be met through supply. Okay, what are we up to? So I work for a company called Sanger, and Sanger's a 40-year-old trade and wholesale business. You could call it a non-packer exporter. It's the largest non-processor exporter in Australia, and it's a terrific business. It is one of several assets within the Binderee Beef Group. Binderee Beef being the large abattoir based in Inverell, which is processing around about 6,000 cattle per week. And recently we took delivery of the Myola feedlot that I was an analyst on 10 years ago with my then boss Ian Perry, who's in the audience here. So we're an integrated supply chain. I joined this business because there was activity. There was a merger, they were looking for a capital raising, and they had some really, really good measured desire to build in local markets, and China's one of those. It's not a worldwide meat trader. With an integrated business, you drive a premium on what you produce because you can control the supply chain. We are one plant supplying global markets in a local fashion. Our desire is to put as much as we possibly can at eye level in a supermarket or at a retail point. Full shelf solution. That's Sanger and Binderee. So we're leveraging Sanger for its worldwide reach. Many customers, 50 countries, 40 years, and a great team with our integrated business at the back end of, at the front end of Binderee. 2 weeks ago, we issued a press release talking about or announcing that Shandong Delisi Food would acquire 45% of our business, Binderee Beef Group, for $140 million. Delisi is one of the largest meat processors with a market capitalisation of around about $1 billion, 5,000 employees. That injection of capital expands our capabilities, it improves our facilities with the latest technologies, and importantly, that deep expertise in meat sales and processing provides or joins their premium and trusted brands with our avenues of supply. We're quite excited about this, and to say that I'll be visiting China soon is an understatement. But it's terrific. It's not just about a large partner, it's about several. I talked about the technology angle of China, and what we're doing here drives our strategy with respect to that full shelf solution. JD.com, as it's written there, is the third largest online retailer globally. In terms of online retail in China, they have a 54% market share. What we liked about this company is that they have a closed loop logistics business. And so when we look at that business, we think our product will not escape that closed loop, and if it does, or if someone's promoting it outside of that loop, it's not ours. So that's very, very important to us. These guys are doing 42 million SKUs, and they've got a 2.5 million warehouse capacity, and they can distribute in the markets where we believe that premium consumer resides. The product is first cut, and it's the first fresh, chilled, packed, retail-ready beef. The key with it is it's fully traceable back to the paddock via the plant at Inverell. Brett talked about several points about CIQ and customs testing and things, and that's very, very real. We've been through a very similar process, and it's just something that takes a long time, and it's worth investing heavily in to get it right. So I guess, why did we do it? We're not selling that to the whole of China. We market researched this hugely. We took a number of months to work out what we were going to be selling, where we were going to be selling it, and who we were going to be selling it to. Urban areas are obviously a logical market, but now that urban is 50-50, urban rural is 50-50 in China, it doesn't narrow it too much. But what we're looking at is that upper middle to highest income group who are consuming 40% more premium protein than what we'd term a lower income group. I talked about the supply chain integrity with JD.com, the closed loop, but I didn't mention the 98 million active buyers in the JD.com ecosystem, nor the 150 million deliveries they did last year. Luckily for us, they have an arrangement with WeChat, so there's the 600 million people popping up on your phone, and they use those very extensively, very pointed and measured advertising and promotion through the WeChat network. So that then provides them with big data. So we'll know, hopefully we will know, what's going on with that product real time. So it won't be a real retrospective looking back as much as it is an immediate communication on how we're going. Now, JD.com is an online retailer. They're not a beef business. So they're going to help us promote our business, promote our product, as long as it's a good product and it sells well. So they're very, very invested in making sure that every SKU they have is a strong seller. So the pressure's on. So through that short trip through the China economy into Australian agriculture and where it stands, and then into what we're up to, I guess I'd like to leave you with this. China is a very significant country for Australian agriculture. The China-Australia Free Trade Agreement is an absolute game changer. It absolutely is. And I'm so pleased that it will be passed through the House of Representatives, and I absolutely commend Minister Rob and the team for what they've done, but it is up to business to execute it. It's not up to the government to execute it. So it's up to all of us. We must adapt to a rapidly changing marketplace, and China is one where you can witness a lot of change happening at a vast level. And it's characterised by consumer-driven behaviours and ongoing technical disruption, which will ultimately win the day for us if we can adapt to it. I hope we do, and I hope you do. And I thank you very, very much for listening to me.